Hi, welcome to Eternal Beta. I'm Scott Rowe.
I'm Nathan Anderson.
Thank you for joining us again. This week we're going to talk about a topic that we get a lot of questions about from our clients, and that is mobile optimization versus responsive design. They're really two different things, and I think there's a lot of misconceptions on people's parts in regards to what the difference is and how they're really leveraged appropriately. So we did some research in regards to kind of overall mobile usability and people's expectations, and Google had some statistics that I found quite interesting. One was that 67% of mobile users who land on a mobile optimized site are more likely to convert than if the page wasn't mobile optimized. Now, in that context, when they say mobile optimized site, they would either mean responsive or mobile specific. The difference is, are you looking at a full desktop version of a site, or are you looking at something that is optimized to be viewed on a tablet or an Android or iOS, a small screen. The second was 48% of users say they feel frustrated or annoyed when they go to a site that is not mobile friendly, which, it kind of makes sense. Nathan and I have a little bit difference of opinion than a lot of consumers do, but 48%, so that's almost half of people that go to a site, if it's not mobile optimized and they come to it from a mobile device, do become annoyed or frustrated. And that's really important from a brand perspective if you're trying to create that strong user interface. And the third,
although would the 52% feel frustrated if they landed on a mobile optimized site?
Well, the stats didn't say that. I don't know. And the third was 50% of people said that even if they did like a business or a brand, they would be less likely to use them through the web if it wasn't mobile friendly.
That's just those same guys.
The same people.
50-48,
yeah, about the same. But it is interesting, and it just kind of provokes some conversation between the two of us about what is appropriate and what does work well. And I think it is a case by case scenario, but we are seeing a rapid trend from mobile optimized sites to responsive sites. Now,
I think probably a good thing, we take for granted that we know all this stuff, but like when Scott's saying a mobile optimized site, he's meaning maintaining a separate dedicated mobile website like from your current property. Like CNN and CNN.com and m.cnn.com. It's specifically distinct web property, whereas a responsive site, basically by using fancy technology, you can have the screen, the layout change based on the screen size.
Right. Mobile sites were very common and still are pretty common in that you had so many different types of devices and you had a lot of different web browsers, mobile web browsers that didn't have the same types of capabilities. We're very fortunate today in that the vast majority of Android devices, BlackBerry devices, iOS devices, all can render a full-scale web page within the mobile environment, the same
smart.
as a desktop page. They're smart, right? They can handle that now. They have the computing power and the software to do that. Historically, that wasn't the case. You had tons of different types. You had a lot of like Nokia phones that had their own web browsers. You had the old Palm OS that didn't have the full web browser capabilities. So you would ultimately decide, I'm going to take a section of my site or a specific subset of features that I think are going to be most relevant to this user group. So that may ultimately be, okay, I'm a restaurant organization, I have 15 locations, and when somebody comes to my website through a mobile device, they just want to find out where the closest location is. So they're going to present that as that core piece of functionality. But the history of the company, the news, press releases, press materials, and all that stuff, they feel isn't relevant to that target audience. Now,
which I think is the biggest problem with that type of mobile site. You're making a huge assumption about a user's behavior. You're assuming that because I'm accessing this site from a phone, that I'm only interested in a specific subset of actions, which is becoming less and less relevant nowadays with more and more smartphones and people doing anything and everything with them all day. Mm-hmm. To assume that I only want to contact you or find out where your store is, it can be a very frustrating one. And I think that's maybe what the other 52% of the people who don't like mobile websites, or we maybe surmise,
or may not have an opinion either way.
Yeah.
So with mobile sites, there's advantages and there is disadvantages. Part of the problem is that they aren't necessarily going to look good on every device. They're really kind of optimized for a specific type of device, generally speaking. So they're not always going to look the same. Another real problem is, from a marketing perspective and a SEO perspective, is that it does spread out your SEO ranking across multiple domains. So that could be a subdomain like m. or it could be a .mobi. But you're having like two separate sites and two separate types of content, pages of content optimized. And that's not necessarily a good thing for search engines. Ultimately, you want to have strong optimization for specific pages that are most relevant. So by separating that, especially from a Google's perspective, it's not necessarily a good thing.
Well, and even worse when you visit a search result and you get redirected to a mobile page that was not the content that you were presented. I don't see it as much anymore, but that was a very common, very frustrating thing, that I find a specific news article that I'm interested in and I get redirected to the index of the website. Actually, Omaha.com's current site does that, and it's very bad.
Is it doing that now?
Yeah.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah, their new site.
The new site. And also, it makes sharing difficult. If you have, if you're on your mobile device and you find a good page or a good article and you want to share that to somebody using a desktop, if they use that same URL, they're literally seeing this mobile version of it. I'm sure all of us have experienced that at one point or another. You have an entirely different type of header and navigation structure. Sometimes there really isn't even much of a navigation structure. So there can be some real problems with it. But from a responsive perspective, though, I mean, there are some benefits and disadvantages of that as well.
Well, yeah, like we were touched on earlier, responsive is supposed to be the best of both worlds in that it can automatically, the page is able to automatically tell the size of the device, and so if a developer chooses to accommodate, I can say have a special layout for this size screen versus this size screen versus this size screen, and it's all based on the pixels of the screen, not the actual inches, and so you can then tailor your content and not have the problems that we were just talking about. Like, particularly in my mind, the best part about responsive is the SEO boost. Because I think the mobile redirect probably just killed people's conversions and content viewing for a very long time, and didn't really even maybe realize that was happening. Just happy to see hits to the mobile homepage. So that's a huge benefit, but I think one of the key problems with mobile in general is we traditionally have made websites for very large screens, and now we're trying to cram the same amount of information into a much smaller screen. And so the problem before with having too little information on a page, now we potentially have too much in a screen like this. And so there's a lot of patterns in terms of user interface of scrunching stuff and just stacking it afterwards. And I find it to be very good for consuming content, like reading an article. But if I'm doing something more action-oriented, like searching for a product, I personally find it more frustrating, and I prefer a desktop site.
It depends on what the goal or the purpose of the website is. If it's an e-commerce site, it could be a little bit different experience than if it's more of an informational website about products and services. It can just, it does depend on the application. I do think, that the important part being that every single page that does exist on the desktop site also exists within the responsive, because it is the same site. It's the exact same page that's being rendered. It's just being displayed differently based on the device that you're actually accessing it with. Now, when you said that all the information is displayed, just being reorganized or positioned differently, that's true, but you can't.
It's also technically not, because that's the choice of the developer. You could actually choose to hide
and
things.
That's what I was going to say.
Which
is theoretically, you could hide specific things. Like if you have specific promotional modules or something like that that may not fit as well within that responsive design, you can have those not display within the mobile device, but they would appear on the desktop device. And from a search engine's perspective, that content still completely exists. So, that's kind of important. So one other stat that we had read was that 61% of mobile users are likely to move on to a competitor site if the page they landed on isn't optimized for mobile. And I'm sure that part of that has to do with the type of website and the type of industry, but I do think that it is becoming more common for users to become a little more frustrated if they do go to a site that that is a little more difficult to use and they have to pinch and squeeze to get to different information. And if a site is still using flash technology or things like that don't work well on a mobile device, that obviously is a pretty big hindrance too. And there are an enormous number of sites, even for larger companies, that still use some level of flash technology, which are completely unusable on either Android or iOS or BlackBerry. It just doesn't work.
Yep.
So, I hope that helps to clarify a little bit of the difference between mobile and responsive. There are some benefits to using mobile in certain circumstances. Responsive is now basically the model that most companies are trying to follow, and there are some major advantages to that. But like with any type of technology and any type of solution, there can always be caveats for why you should or shouldn't use one thing or another. So you need to really think about what the purpose of your site is, who your customers are, the type of mobile devices that they're using, look at your analytics and all of that before you really dive in with both feet and make that, what could be a relatively large investment into mobile optimization, whether that be an independent mobile site, an independent app, whether an iOS or an Android application, or responsive. So I hope that helps. If you have any additional questions or thoughts, please go ahead and tweet us at Bozell.com, on
No,
Twitter.
just at Bozell.
Just at Bozell? Oh yeah, sorry, I said .com.
Yeah.
Just at Bozell.
You can visit
on Twitter.
Bozell.com.
And let us know if you have any questions, and we'll see you next time.
Later.